Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome along to Beyond Bitcoin, a show about mostly not Bitcoin in this fabulous space. Two gentlemen chatting away together. Today we have a guest. May I welcome my friend and colleague, Nitin Gower. Hello, Nitin.
Hey, Derek. Glad to be here. As an introduction, my name is Nitin. I serve as Director of Financial Sciences and Digital Assets. I also serve as Head of Research at Portal Asset Management. Another exciting week, and we have a good friend of mine and looking forward to having a chat with him.
Terrific indeed. And so just a reminder, this of course is a show that's about two gentlemen talking about the space, and today, third gentleman joining us. It's not here for investment advice. So Nitin, please welcome along John Volpert today. We're delighted to have you along, John, and you're a great friend of Nitin. So over to you, Nitin, to introduce John.
Thank you. No, it's a great pleasure to have John Volpert, a good friend of mine from IBM days, the person who's seen this industry from the very early days. He was the man behind what today is Hyperledger Foundation. He then built a bunch of products for IBM, moved on to building what today is known as Baseline. And so certainly a pioneering mind. And so John, welcome. I appreciate our friendship. I also appreciate the counsel, the advice that I oftentimes come to you with, and also your sort of pioneering thought in this industry. So welcome to our show.
Thanks, Nitin. Don't get me in trouble though. There's a whole lot of other people that can lay claim to being one of the OGs of Hyperledger.
That's
I think
my
the only
perspective,
claim
John.
to fame I get is that Moise Kouari and I from LSEG had a boozy lunch one day in New York. Boozy being, I think I had one drink, and but Moise, he had like 10 drinks. No, I'm kidding.
That's right.
And we're like, we should start a foundation. We should call it something. And then Blythe Masters called it Hyperledger, which got me in a bunch of trouble with other people. That was a fun day.
As I understand it, Nitin, you guys, as I understand it, Nitin, John, you've started a number of projects and you've been an entrepreneur for a number of years.
Yeah, two or three companies. I had a nonprofit in Australia we were talking about beforehand, which was really, I thought it was going to be my shot at like Nobel Prize work. I wrote a paper in Harvard Business Review in 2002. And this is a true story. I was working for IBM. Was working for Jane Harper, Nitin. Remember Jane?
Wow.
Worked for John Patrick, right? They were like the dynamic duo of internet division. And
right.
I was working for Jane, running Extreme Blue, or one of the labs. And I was in New York, and she called me up and she goes, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm in New York meeting." I was actually meeting my mentor. And I said, "I'm in New York." And she goes, "You need to be in Savannah in 4 hours." I was like, "Why?" She goes, "The Australian government wants to talk to you." So I fly down to Savannah, and there's this guy. He wasn't in the government. It wasn't, but he worked for AI Group, which you may know, Derek. And very nice man. And he goes, "Right, read your paper." It's like, "Thought I was right. Would you like to come down to Canberra and talk about it?" And I was like, "Okay." Well, at the time I was like, "Is that a bar somewhere? Where do you want me to go?" I'm going to get in trouble. But I went down. And yeah, a few weeks later, I found myself on the dais in front of all the MPs in Canberra. And I was much, much younger then. And it was quite a head turning experience. And I got off the dais. I did my little speech about collaborative innovation was the topic, and we had this idea, the scheme for, which I still think is really important. It was just too early. We didn't have AI tools that would have been very helpful for this. Basically, we were embedding what we call trusted intermediaries down into the bench level of companies, research companies, and other research labs, and they were allowed to tell each other everything that they knew, on the condition that they never told anybody else. And then you would walk parties into a relationship if you found a win-win, and it was your group fiduciary responsibility to not tell them anything if you sensed that it was going to be a win-lose. That was the idea.
Got it. Yes.
And the MP I was sitting next to, I sit down and he goes, "It's a good speech, mate. It's short."
I'm very pleased that you're having a good shot at the Australian accent. I think you're doing pretty well at it too, John.
Well, I did spend 4 or 5
I think
years
so.
And no, he was a very nice man. And before I knew it, we had a bunch of money from the government and from several of the I think it was Victoria, and Brisbane, Brisbane government. Anyway, so we had, and I had to move down there. So I moved to Australia for a bunch of years. It was wonderful.
Very good. Well, as I understand it, this meandering journey of a number of companies and projects that you've created along the way has brought you to create a non-fungible token company. And that's something I'd like to talk with you about today and talk about the world of NFTs. And I understand you've just been to a conference on the world of NFTs, but just to set a quick sort of context to this for the listeners, you know, the world of NFTs at the moment, according to JP Morgan, is about $7 billion of sales. And they say that the art aspect is sitting at around $2 billion a month. So, you know, it's an enormous increase for now, of course, because it's just a snapshot in time. And it's an enormous increase from what was about 400 million a month back in January this year. It's interesting to see there's growing entry players like Microsoft and Home Depot and Tesla and Whole Foods and Starbucks and, you know, names that I don't normally associate with non-fungible tokens, you know, are coming into the space. But so much of this space is about building community and about building ecosystems and about building an environment where the creative can start, you know, enabling themselves, not only selling their wares and selling their products, but building their communities.
Is it really?
That's what I'm going to ask you about, because you know, it's come from nowhere 24 months ago, this world of NFTs, really 36 months ago, I hadn't heard the term, to where it is today. Maybe just take us through that journey. Where did it start broadly 3 years ago? And how has it arrived here? And has it arrived here organically, or has it just arrived here with some master plan?
You know, there's a lot of ways to be an entrepreneur, and it knows very well that my approach is, I'll call it the Shakespearean comedy approach, as opposed to the Shakespearean tragedy approach. The tragedy starts good and ends up bad. I like to start bad and end up good. That is, find something that's just patently stupid and unstupid, right? Enterprise blockchain is patently stupid, right? The idea, and specifically, the idea of, and I know this because I built one, right? Thinking of blockchains as fancy super secure databases is just a bad idea, was always a bad idea. We should, all of us who were involved in that, should turn in our technologist badges at the door because we forgot basic principles of distributed systems, right? They're just inefficient, and they are, more importantly, digital nudist colonies, right? A blockchain trying to be a database, you wind up with this tangle of complexity trying to get a blockchain pattern to become a good a thing that knows how to do what you really want in a database, which is compartmentalization, right? I can do access controls very nicely on NetSuite, SAP, MS Dynamics, any database, but any idiot with a node in your private blockchain network is going to get hacked and make the point of a private blockchain irrelevant. So a private blockchain is just a digital nudist colony on a private beach. Anybody that gets access to that beach, you can encrypt it, everything, but that's encrypting everything is kind of like wearing a Speedo to a nudist colony. You know, it's not like you're leaving a lot to the imagination. I'm going to figure you out, especially in the world of AI where I can grab classifiers off of almost anything. It's just a bad idea to put company data of almost any kind of company data that's going to be sensitive under some context, right? So blockchain was kind of dumb, but, and this is where my current work with the baseline protocol, it's baseline-protocol.org, which is a standards body, not a scheme or a coin or a token or even a product. It's a standard. It's a technique or design pattern for doing not stupid cross-company multi-party workflows under zero knowledge. Notice I didn't say blockchain, right? There is some blockchain involved, and we don't need to sell that because it's a boring, all that blockchain does in a baseline pattern is make sure that zero knowledge proofs are not tampered with, because that's what blockchains are good with. At public ones especially are good at avoiding, preventing, or at least making sure they maximize tamper resistance and minimize surveillance resistance. So hence, don't put data on it. Also, don't put data on a private one unless you really want it to get out in the open. But you and don't put business logic on it. So don't write smart contracts thinking that should be your back end to your your enterprise application. Terrible idea, super inefficient. You got noisy neighbor problems, bad idea. But you can put proofs on a public blockchain in Merkle trees. And you can put, especially what we're doing, you can put them in L2s that are anchored to the mainnet. So I'm pretty sure that proof is not going to be changed. And that proof proves that Nitin and I have the same information, and it can prove some attribute of that information, like I didn't overcharge him, or we followed a particular regulation or some other workflow requirement without divulging the actual data. Now think about that. That is a non-controversial. You can throw a rock in any direction and find a use case that needs that today, because everybody today needs to work with other companies, and they're terrified about it because without a zero knowledge technique like the baseline protocol, you have to do, the only way you can do it is by sharing a lot of data and business logic between companies.
Yeah. So one thing for the audience, John, just to highlight what zero knowledge proof, or ZKP in short, is for, because many of the audience may not know the depth at which you're describing this. So just for the information, zero knowledge proof allows you, proving that some secret or more than one, like many secrets, to somebody that on the other end of the communication channel, which is the two companies that you mentioned here, without actually revealing the information itself. So the very term zero knowledge originates from the fact that no or zero information about the secret is revealed, but the second party, called the verifier, so there's a prover and verifier, the two parties involved, is rightfully convinced that the first party, which is the prover, knows the secret in question. And
that's right. And there's some requirements, like you have to do it in such a way that the party would reveal, you're revealing nothing that would allow the party to, the party you're proving to ascertain anything about the secret. So for example, and it's an inversion of the way to think about things, right? If you have a big database, if you can convince every company out there to put all their data in a supply chain into a big shared database, blockchain or otherwise, right? And that's the way we should have called enterprise blockchain from the very beginning. We should just call them shared databases. Then everybody would have known what we were getting into. And if you want a shared database, good on you, use that. But understand what you've got is the point. And we didn't. We fooled ourselves. We fooled a lot of people. But with the zero knowledge proof, I can say, instead of saying, if I have that big bolus of data, I can do, especially if it's like a graph database, I can say, I've got a contamination in the supply chain. These radishes are contaminated. Okay, I'm going to run a graph traversal and find where all the bad radishes are, right? Any radish that touched any other radish that was contaminated, and you have an epidemiological spread, and you can run that traversal and you can find where the radishes is. And that's great, except companies don't like sharing that data. They really don't. We fooled them for a while, like Walmart Food Trust. They said blockchain a lot, and more importantly, they said, and we'll get you on stage in Vegas with the CEO of IBM if you put your data in here, right? So that was
so John, is this zero knowledge?
Yes, sure. Yeah, I'm laying down some zero knowledge. But the other way to think about it is, okay, I don't want your data. I need to be able to scan this particular lot of radishes, and it to be able to prove that it has never touched any bad radishes. That's the way to think about a zero knowledge proof. It's a little less good if if you can get a big bolus of data, that's also awesome. The problem is it comes with consequences like tampering or not tampering. But
what you're talking about is something that says this is correct.
That's
Don't
correct.
worry about how it's correct or why it's correct. It's just correct.
Yes, and you can believe it.
And you can believe it. Well, it's a very powerful position. You don't have to
very
know
powerful,
the data,
right? You can do that with bank reporting. Exactly. You can do that. And it's a better distributed systems pattern, right? So Nitin will know. If you had three banks, right? Say I have a bank that's a factor, or I'm a factor, and I have a bank that's enabling that. And Derek, you're the supplier to a buyer, and I'm the buyer, right? Now, if Nitin, the factor, pays you, Derek, the supplier, and then I'm supposed to pay I'm the buyer. I'm going to pay Nitin later on, right? My bank kind of wants to know that Nitin paid you before they pay him. Now, the way to do that today is a mess of API calls. It's why Plaid makes money. And it's not an elegant pattern at all. And it's all hearsay. It's not really the true, is some SAP system saying I paid without actually knowing if the payment went through. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be better in a world where the banks all were baseline capable and they were dropping proofs, and the supplier's bank simply dropped a proof? My bank, the buyer's bank, is watching for that proof, pub sub, basically, right? And when I see that proof, I run it and I go, yep, okay, it's been paid. I don't have a problem. I'm going to pay you. And to be able to do that, where you're dropping those proofs to a bulletin board where nobody can figure out anything about the relationship between the three of us, the fact that we are a thing. The data is not data; it's just hashes or fancy hashes.
That's right.
So a proof tells no tales. You can, as an enterprise, if you're thinking clearly, and that's an important caveat, if you're thinking clearly, then an enterprise should be able to be fine with dropping proofs on a public blockchain.
Right. And Derek, one problem that John is describing here in terms of the enterprise databases or enterprise blockchain is the fact that when we build this enterprise blockchain, the thesis was for us to build a consortium of, let's say, a specific industry like supply chain and trade finance or whatever the case is. You expected them to come to this consortium, and by definition, it's shared databases. Yeah. And no company or no entity in a consortium would like to share their information. So that became a problem. Second problem in most enterprise blockchains, at least what we discovered later on, was it became a software project where you need an admin and you needed all these folks who were sort of conduits, which sort of took away the entire element of trust in blockchain systems, which was driven by protocol. So oftentimes it was a half quasi protocol driven from a database replication perspective, but at the same time, it was also driven by a bunch of humans who are assigned with different companies because they had to have a node to run this. So it made it a bit clunky. It didn't sort of completely adhere to the core tenets of blockchain, as protocol implementation. However, I think from what John's describing in baseline is that instead of sharing data, if we can employ technologies like zero knowledge proof, and there's a whole family of technologies, both interactive and non-interactive, is be able to share the status reports and be able to share sort of confidential information between two parties without sharing the data, which obfuscates not just the notion of moving data, but also in terms of where they are in a certain state of a transaction, which progresses the business process management.
That's right. It's not supply chain transparency we want. In fact, we really don't want that. We don't want the bad guys knowing where all the food is, right? We don't want transparency. Anybody that says transparency isn't thinking hard about the words they're using. What we want is supply chain integrity. And zero knowledge proofs can enforce correctness and completeness of workflow steps such that, you and I may be in the 35th workflow step of a supply chain. We shouldn't even know about the people in the first two workflow steps, perhaps, but we need to know that things that they did were correct. We need to know that they got the certificate of origin. We don't need the actual data as long as we can have a proof that it's there, right? Things like that, right? Or say you're shipping through a competitor, like, say you're shipping through Amazon. You really want Amazon to know everything about your, the supply chain up through your process? No, you just want them to deliver the package, but you need the date of the package, right? So that you can cut your invoice. Wouldn't it be nice if they could just dead drop that on a bulletin board and you pick it up and they don't have to know that much about you or your customer?
Well, I think that's true even for public blockchains, John. I think one tenet of most public blockchain, they are fairly sort of, you have everything else in the open, and these are sort of open databases, and they are sort of shared between all the validators and everything else. I'm just wondering that application, which is what we have seen again with the massive investment that Polygon has done with Mina Protocol. Nightfall, which is our friend Paul Brody at EY, has worked with Polygon. You have Matter Labs who've invested. So I begin to believe that privacy preservation is a layer, not just a layer 2 protocol, which is basically addressing scalability, security, privacy. I think privacy preservation, including privacy preserving coins, who are sort of borrowing the same principle that you described, is that privacy is an important part. That even though you're working on these payment networks, by looking into two addresses, I can derive all kinds of relationship elements between two parties. And as you described, that if I obfuscate that and simply put them on bulletin board that nobody can really decipher except the two or multiple parties who are involved in the transaction, I think ZKPs or zero knowledge proof players such a critical role in sort of bringing that to this, this world. I think it's universally applicable, not just to enterprise blockchain, but also to public blockchains who are
to computing in general, right? I mean, the challenge I have and my colleagues have, I think, right now is blockchain folks like Vitalik Buterin, who did really important seminal work on not only advancing but popularizing the approach. I mean, back we had Craig Gentry at IBM, right? Homomorphic encryption, but it was really hard. So we've made real advances since those days, right? This isn't that old. I mean, even the venerable hash is only late 70s, right? It wasn't popularized until the 90s. Now it's changed everything. Isn't it funny though? Hashes have no hype cycle. They're just useful, right? Where was the hashing hype cycle? It's more important than almost everything that we talk about these days in the pundit world. But it's changed everybody's lives in ways that they have no idea. RSA is the same thing, right? I mean, this is important stuff. Nobody cares because it works. It's in the plumbing, and nobody has to care. It's the stuff maybe that doesn't work that gets hype cycles. I don't know.
True, and I think the fully homomorphic encryption, which was again Craig Gentry, 1970s, zero knowledge proof was actually in 80s, which is Silvio Macaulay, who is now the founder of Algorand, and Shafi Goldwasser, who again we know this.
Didn't Craig go to Algorand?
I
think Craig went to Algorand.
Yeah, and he may have gone, and I think all these technologies have been there for 20, 30 plus years. I think they're coming to fruition now because one, there's a need for it. There's enough energy around the ecosystem that's driving further innovation, both in terms of protocol efficiency, but also we have enough compute power to dedicate to the, this, which is bringing all the tech, which is 20, 30 years old, to fruition and meaningful application of this than what it was in 80s, because we didn't have enough compute power to be able to do the processing.
This is why I'm sanguine about it, right? Because you can plot these curves, right? You can plot, it's funny. I mean, most of this stuff has to do with elliptic curve math. But you can plot the compute, the remainder of the Moore's law against what we need to handle the load of especially setting up zero knowledge proofs. Processing them, that is proving them, is actually by design, depending on the technique you're using, cheap, right? But the setting of them up can be expensive computationally. By the way, you don't do that on blockchain. But just to close the thought before, the blockchain community has really moved hard on zero knowledge. So it's hard to not conflate zero knowledge techniques with blockchain and with the idea of trying to do privacy preserving stuff when it comes to moving cryptos around. But, kind of true to my past lives, Nitin, I'm the guy that has no interest in those things. I'm not the finance guy. I don't particularly like finance that much. I just turned down an opportunity to run a DeFi company. Found a much better CEO for that. To me, I'm from Michigan. Everything finance, both DeFi and CeFi, looks like gambling to me, and I'm just not a good gambler. So I'm not into finance or cryptos that much. But I like the technical patterns and what you can use them for other than that. So zero knowledge techniques, where the only thing we're asking the blockchain to do is make sure the proofs didn't get changed. We're not running those circuits on chain, and we're not using them simply to buy cryptos anonymously or secretly. Rather, we're saying, hey, you and I have some information, and we need to prove to Derek that we have the same information and that there's something about it that we need to prove to Derek, but we don't want to show Derek the data. And we can do that with traditional systems of record and messaging and a ZK component like NARK, GNARK, which happens to be a product made by my company Consensus. And, and a few other bits. And then what we want is what's called in the standard CCSM. It doesn't even say blockchain, by the way. It says CCSM, a consensus controlled state machine. That's your bulletin board. And whatever counterparties need to do this job, they just need a CCSM that is sufficiently tamper resistant to satisfy their needs. It could be private. In fact, most of the remaining, maybe dozen or so, private blockchains that are out there that are in production in a legitimate way, if you look under the covers, I'll wager you will find them basically storing hashes. They're not. No,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think
the data's on
argument,
Mongo or something.
Yeah, the whole argument that zero knowledge and any of the privacy preserving technologies like homomorphic encryption or fully or partially homomorphic encryption and zero knowledge proofs are computationally intensive. I would argue that as a layer 2 solution, for example, many of these zero knowledge technologies are helping scale blockchain. So for example, in case of ZK rollups,
they are certainly.
Right. Yeah. Zero knowledge are used to condense hundreds of transfers of single transaction record, making a smart contract to deconstruct and verify all of these transactions into one. And with ZK rollups, the effective computing scale and required storage resources to validate and block, drastically minimizing the amount of data, I think has a tremendous amount of impact on scalability of blockchain. So I think this whole element, as you're describing, is much more profound in terms of the compute power that's needed to process transactions. And this privacy preservation is not just for providing privacy, but also is an effective layer 2 solution where these additional layers make it much more efficient to process transactions, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So that's where that is a good thing, but it also creates this problem where people assume that when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about blockchains and putting their data on blockchains. In fact, I had a meeting with a company, and it was like an hour-long meeting, and they were like, this is great, and they came back a couple weeks later. And I had spent most of the meeting saying, don't put data on blockchains. And they came back saying, well, we really love this baseline thing, but we're really scared about putting our data on a blockchain. I'm like,
so I get this, with financial and supply chain. If you look at NFTs, right, I'm not jumping, I'm treating NFT as asset class, which is backed behind an image or art, which is meant to be shared, right? And I'm just getting your perspective in terms of what you've done with baseline and the discussion we've had in terms of privacy preservation. Do NFTs in terms of art, music, anything which is non-fungible, for example, where there's a whole element of show off and there's a whole element of display, does zero knowledge make sense in those contexts?
I think so. And so the funny thing is, again, right, I just spent most of this time, dishing on blockchain, and I'm in a blockchain company. And now I'm going to dish on NFTs, and I'm about to start an NFT company.
Tell us more about that.
This is the irony of my life. Again, it's, the Emperor's Clothes. In fact, treetrunk.io is the project we're working on right now. If you go to treetrunk.io, you'll see, and you click on the slideshow, you will see our mascot, the Emil, the Emperor's Clothes penguin. And he's a penguin covering himself with his nakedness, and it's funny. And that's the mascot, because really there's an Emperor's Clothes problem, just like in private blockchain and public blockchain as well. There are these, this Emperor's Clothes problem, and with NFTs, the Emperor's Clothes problem is we have somehow gotten people to believe, artists and collectors, that they're buying an NFT, right? Many of them believe that their art is the NFT. Mm-hmm. Now, their art is the art. And it's a file, a JPEG file often, sitting on a public file server that anybody can get to and download and make their own NFT out of. What are you owning? You can't control it. You can't, it's out in the open. In the world of ones and zeros, you've got nothing. You have bought nothing. So people then can conjure things like, oh, it's flex. I get my bragging rights. I'm like, you get a bragging right that you paid $69 million for something that anybody could download and enjoy for free. Your bragging right is going to be something very different in a few years. It's going to be the embarrassment right. Right now, I think what's happened is we've conflated traditional thinking about art collecting with what's going on in the world of ones and zeros, right? If you collect the Mona Lisa, you put it in a museum, people get to see it. You have some control over the atoms, right? And with some work sometimes that you have the actual genuine article, and there's only one of them. right? The only thing in an NFT that you know there is only one of is the sales receipt. And that is a poor compensation. That is a poor, if you think of it that way, which is the correct way to think about it, right? An NFT is simply a sales receipt recorded on a public bulletin board. That's it. That's all it is. It's metadata.
It's the validation of transfer of providence, isn't it?
I prefer sales receipt, right? Let's not to mess with
Simple
you,
guy.
but no, I
So
think
what
words
does tree
matter,
trunk
right?
do
I
then?
think that
what does
by
tree
calling,
trunk do to resolve that?
yeah. So we looked at that, and I spent the better part of a year, making fun of NFTs, hopefully in a funny way and in a good-hearted way. I mean, I don't mind. I spent a lot of time these days on like Clubhouse, and there was a young woman on not too long ago who I found quite moving in her story. I'm getting old at 55, so I get weepy a little, and I found myself with a tear in my eye, in fact, because she was talking about how she was able to pay the rent for the first time in her life with her art, and that's great. While the bubble's happening, and while this insanity is going on, and while art as stock certificate is a thing. You said something earlier, Derek, that NFTs are all about community. Well, I found when I was at NFT Basel in Miami, a lot of people who had something to sell saying the word community a lot, and it made me distrust them. I don't think they're about community. I think they're about big or fool. I think they're about getting you to buy something for more than you paid for it. The other guy paid for it. I think that's what's going on. It's not community, right? If it was about community, Patreon would be sufficient. If it was about community, I would say I paid $69 million to Beeple because I care about him and his work, and I put it into Patreon so that he could spend it. Why do I need an NFT? I don't, right? I don't own anything. It's not real. But
there's one thing on that.
And this is that's the tragedy side, right? Start bad, go positive, right? So I've got to, keep listening. The positive side is there is one thing about that fancy sales receipt that is pretty interesting, and that is royalties, right? In the current state, anytime that token trades, I get the artist can get a percentage of the sale after the first one.
Yes.
Right. So usually you sell your art. That's it. That's how much you made.
Generationally, potentially.
Yes. What's interesting, imagine Rembrandt could have gotten money every time somebody bought a Rembrandt.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of interesting. Secondary market. Right. So we took that idea and we took this in a fever dream, thinking about baselining and about zero knowledge and coordination under zero knowledge. We struck on a notion that is the foundation of treetrunk.io. And that is, and it's in the slide deck, and I think it's pretty clearly laid out. You take a file, JPEG file, you add some entropy watermark, flip 256 ones and zeros in the picture, effectively, and you encrypt that. But before you encrypt it, you create some number of children prints. So think of it like lithography, right? I've got a plate, and I'm going to print 100 prints. I'm going to have signed numbered prints. I'm going to break the plate, right? So in the world of ones and zeros, if you can observe those ones and zeros, you can copy them. So how do I know if I'm buying that original from you, right? So now I'm going to, that watermark copy becomes the original. And I'm going to drop that into a black hole, and I'm going to throw away the decryption key. And I can put it in a nice vase or something, and I can say, this is the original. The thing you can see is a child of the original. That's my public museum piece. It is verifiably a child of the original, but it is also verifiably not the original. So I can sell you the original. I can prove it looks like this other thing. I can prove it's the parent of all these other prints. But you also know that I've never copied it because I couldn't. And that's what you buy. You buy that. So now you have control over a unique asset, exclusivity, certainty that you're the only one that owns it. And most importantly, you now have a royalty stream from all the children. And then one more twist, you can do it recursively on each of the children. So now those children have a royalty stream from all of their children. And those grandchildren have a royalty stream from all of their children, etc. You have a multi-layered licensing system. So what we did is we took recursive zero knowledge proof technology using a number of techniques, so that the great grandchild of the original can prove that it is the great grandchild. It can prove its relationship to all the other prints.
Yes.
And anytime it moves or makes money, its parent gets some percentage, its parent gets some percentage, its parent gets some percentage, and the ultimate artist gets some percentage. And what I like about this, the thing that I think is super powerful about this idea, is that as I keep on thinking about the mid-level artists, I mean, I grew up in the theater, and I got out of the theater because it's a tournament game, and the business of theater, theater can be creative, but the business of theater is not. And it's because it's always the same game. It's a tournament game. You make no money until you make all the money. Same with art, right? You make no money until you're Beeple or banks or whomever, right? What about that working artist down the stack? Well, if you have a whole bunch of people, everybody that owns a copy of their work is a part of the business of moving more of the work, and they have an interest in it as a licensee. Now you have a royalties empire, and that can sustain a small artist, I think, in a much more powerful, more sustainable way. So once again, technology is not as important nearly as business models that are enabled by the technology.
Correct, but I would argue, on that you effectively use the tech for all the right things, but some of the fundamental elements that goes into pricing of NFTs is scarcity, and that goes into saying this one of a kind. But if you give a broad license for many of them to say, this is not the original, but it comes from the original elements, where does the whole element of scarcity, and where's the whole element of pricing? And then oftentimes you dilute the entire valuation mechanism of that art, even though I will go buy a copy of Mona Lisa because, or any of the art of Impressionist era, and I enjoy the art. So I'll put it because I can't afford, let's say, a $69 or $100 million art. So is that the thesis here?
Well, the thesis is if you put something like Rarible on one side of the spectrum, this is definitely on the other side, saying, that mass distribution model, has a place in the world, right? You wouldn't want to do this with every NFT. There are some cases where the artist wants all the royalties and doesn't want to share it with their community. That's fine. So you just use what we already have. This is definitely a different case. It's not supposed to be universally applicable, right? It should know what it's used for and what it's not used for. But where royalty models matter, especially like you think about the future of audio, you can use the same process, and you can use this for gaming too. I can instead of like selling you my character, I can sell you prints of my character that have slight different changes, alterations in their floating points or what have you, and interesting things can be done with that. I've got some friends that in and around Epic here in Raleigh, and we've been noodling on what kind of games you could create with this kind of structure where you can prove the attributes of an original without showing the original. I can prove that I can cast a spell in this game without actually showing you the data about that. But then when I cast it, things that the way I cast it is different from the way you would cast it. Interesting stuff.
Sure. Yeah. And, it's interesting because I heard the term gamify. Today I was in a diffuse event online, and I heard the term metafy. And I'm just wondering, are we going crazy with all these new terms that we're popping in, which fundamentally takes, quote unquote, a digital asset, whether it's art or game artifact, try to collateralize it and have a sense of ownership?
I've been playing EVE Online. I've been playing EVE Online, and I was, we have good friends, like Dave Kowalski from, who was in Second Life. I remember Second Life. I guess every generation needs to try stuff over again, and they're going to call it metaverse. I think we called it multiverse or something, or I don't know.
It's metaverse finance, which is an interesting one. It's amalgamating the whole element of decentralized financing and metaverse, and saying and you have game guilders who basically collect. It's a guild, people pull in their gaming artifacts and they rent that out. And I'm like, this is just getting curious.
I'm pretty sure that I don't need transferability between Candy Crush and World of Warcraft, right? I'm pretty sure I don't care to have my Candy Crush tokens usable inside my as converted into an axe or something inside World of Warcraft. So I think I don't want to speak too badly about that, because creative game people will come up with interesting ideas there, where fungibility as it were, or transferability between games is not dumb, but mostly I kind of think it's overblown, right? You spend a lot of time as a game developer or an environment developer trying to create an experience, rig an animated thing or do something that works well in your experience, not in somebody else's necessarily. So we'll see. I worked on something in Australia, in fact, years ago that it might be very much like this. We called it Outback Online. And Derek, it was something we spun up out of NICTA. Remember NICTA? Do you know NICTA? National ICT Australia Research Institute. Pretty good. Yeah, there's some good people there. And they'd come up with a really cool peer-to-peer backplane for MMOs or for anything, but it was particularly good for MMORPGs in the years when Second Life would fall over with like 9 people in the room. And it was a really robust peer-to-peer backplane. And as I think, I'm not sure, but I think that wound up getting licensed to EA games for their instancing around things like Guild Wars, perhaps. But anyway, we came up with this sort of 3D diorama maker where you could have this like free world where you could drop rigged animated things into your world, and you could create portals between your world and somebody else's world. And we called it Outback Online. We tried to sell it to VCs back in 2007 or 8, and they wouldn't have any of it. Partly it was because NICTA wanted like 20% of the deal, and they were like, "No, sorry." But yes, I mean, these patterns kind of come back over and over again. So
right. And you know what, Derek, I told you that John has so many stories that we could have 6 hours and we'll still be able to do it. But this was certainly enlightening, John. Thanks for sharing your expertise. I'll give it back to Derek to wrap it up. But again, I think it was just fascinating conversation. And also, I'm fascinated that you're moving from, or at least baseline plus now tree trunk. It looks very exciting, and I'm looking at your slide deck, and I like the penguin and the thematic elements that it represents, which I think is fantastic.
It's definitely a target-rich environment. Like I said, you can throw a rock in any direction and find a baseline pattern that makes sense and is non-controversial. We have 2 companies spinning out in the next small number of months. Enbridge, keep an eye on Enbridge. That's DeFi. I will buy your invoice if it's baselined for much less than. So it's, well, think of it more as what would be a good international metaphor for Trivago. So I think of it as Trivago for lowest cost of capital. And that, a lot of that came out of both it's a brainchild of both Jason Jones from a bunch of stuff originally from Consensus and other companies. He's a really good CEO. And also the CTO, the former CTO from Definity. He's the CTO now of Enbridge.
Wow.
And really good team. That came out of a baseline thought as well, in part. And so we've got a baseline DeFi company coming out. We've got this baseline NFT company. SAP is really involved these days. And one of the nicest things about baselining is it's not a Cold War anymore between traditional systems of record and blockchain and zero knowledge technology. We're not asking them to move their data from SAP to some other giant threat surface. We're saying, hey, leave it in SAP. And as long as SAP has baseline compliant components, then you can do what you need to do. You can coordinate with others. And now that $1 billion implementation of SAP has much more superpowers than it had before, because now it not only can tell you what you think you know, it can tell you with confidence that your counterparties know the same thing.
Yeah, sure. Because the concept of the zero knowledge to be able to exchange, I've often just simply given the simplest thing, and that is, a beautiful 18-year-old girl at a nightclub handing her ID over to the bouncer and saying, 18, by the way, we're an enlightened organization here in Australia. 18, I'm able to come in, and he's got her name and her address and everything else. It's unnecessary to transfer that sort of, it just has to be, yes, you are. And that's right.
Verified credentials are definitely on the same spectrum as what I'm talking about. And that's what you're talking about. Verified credentials are hugely important.
Which is extraordinary. So what a journey today. So we've gone from, discussing zero knowledge data, which is business to business data, across to broadly open knowledge, NFTs, where the buyers of the NFT also become the royalty owners of some of that NFT royalty that's transacted along the way. Another twist of how NFT occurs. Now, I would argue, sorry, John, that they're all communities. They are communities. It's just whether those communities are trying to make a quid or not on the way through. And so whether they're
I can't
totally,
dispute that.
They
right.
want to wear, whether they want to have dreadlocks in their hair or not, they're communities.
I just heard it a little too often last week. That's all.
That is maybe so. But thank you very much for sharing all of that with us along the way. It's been a great and meandering discussion covering, the importance of zero knowledge, and then again the importance of being able to open up and share replication of products on the way through. If anyone wants to contact John Volpert, you'll find him on LinkedIn. So that's Wolpert, John Volpert, easily found, and drop him a line. I'm sure he'd be delighted to chat with them.
Do one better. Get involved with the Baseline Protocol, baseline-protocol.org.
Right.
If especially in your audience, if you're over at TCS or Infosys or Wipro or any of those companies, a lot of money to be made in what we're talking about today. A lot of money. And a lot easier to get than what we were selling before with blockchain.
So you're either going to be extremely techie with it and seek B2B, or you can be very artistic and go to treetrunk.io and look at NFT transactions. Either way, there's something here for all. So thank you very much indeed, John, for coming along late in your evening. And
Anytime,
thanks again,
Derek,
Nitin,
thanks.
for introducing your good friend, John. Thanks so much indeed, guys.
John, thanks again. Really enjoyed the conversation. We could go for hours, but appreciate your time. Hope you feel better, and we'll chat. We'll chat soon.
Happy holidays, guys. Take care.
Good on you.
Thanks, John.
Bye for now.
Bye.